Across the frozen forests of Finland, the windswept plains of Poland, and the marshes of the Baltic states, a new kind of wall is beginning to rise. Not a wall of concrete or steel, but of sensors pulsing invisibly through the air, of electronic jammers humming with unseen power, and of interceptor drones prowling silently in the night sky. Europe calls it the drone wall, a last line of defense against Moscow. The shock comes not from what it is, but from why it exists. After watching Russia rain wave after wave of cheap Shahed drones on Ukraine's power plants, cities, and barracks, Europe has drawn a chilling conclusion. If Moscow unleashes the same swarms against NATO territory, the results could be catastrophic. The Red Army may never cross the border with tanks again, but its drones could cross in the thousands, overwhelming defenses and paralyzing entire nations. This is why the European Union is committing billions to build something unprecedented, a digital iron curtain stretching across thousands of kilometers of frontier. Radar towers will sweep the skies day and night, jammers will blind incoming swarms, and interceptor drones will meet intruders in deadly duels above forests and fields. To some, it feels like science fiction. To others, it is the only way to survive in an age where the battlefield has shifted from trenches to the skies. The symbolism is heavy. For the first time since the Cold War, Europe is not just preparing for the possibility of conflict. It is hardening its border in anticipation of it. This wall is not just about drones. It is about the fear that the war in Ukraine may not stay in Ukraine. It is about the recognition that Russia has already proven the power of saturation attacks and that the next swarm could fly westward. The drone wall is meant to stop them. The question is whether it can. Where are you watching this from right now? Tell us, because what is happening on Europe's frontier today could decide not just the fate of one border, but the security of an entire continent. And what comes next may determine whether Europe stands firm or watches its defenses crumble in the first real test. The idea was born not in quiet offices, but in the chaos of Ukraine's night skies. Cities plunged into darkness as waves of Shahed drones roared overhead, their engines buzzing like a swarm of mechanical hornets. Air raid sirens screamed, anti-aircraft guns lit up the sky, and missiles raced upward to meet the threat. Yet no matter how many were shot down, others slipped through. Power plants exploded, neighborhoods caught fire, hospitals went dark. It was a brutal lesson written in flames. Even a superpower can be bled dry by thousands of cheap flying machines. European leaders watched closely. In Warsaw, Riga, Tallinn, and Helsinki, the warnings became urgent. If Russia could terrorize Ukraine with drones, what stopped it from unleashing the same tactic on NATO territory? A few dozen drones crashing into power grids in Poland could cripple entire regions. A coordinated swarm over the Baltics could overwhelm defenses before reinforcements even arrived. For the first time since the Cold War, leaders began to ask, what if the border itself is no longer enough? In 2023, defense ministers from the Baltic states and Poland began floating the idea of a joint defense barrier. At first it sounded symbolic, another political gesture. But as Russia's drone war intensified, the idea hardened into necessity. By 2024, Finland, newly part of NATO, joined the call. Together, these nations proposed something radical, a seamless shield stretching thousands of kilometers, not made of barbed wire or concrete, but of technology. Brussels listened. Billions of euros were pledged for research, deployment, and procurement. Contracts were signed with drone manufacturers, radar specialists, and electronic warfare companies. What had once been whispers in think tanks became official doctrine. Europe would build a drone wall. For frontline nations, it was not just about technology, but survival. The Baltics, scarred by history, feared being the first to face Moscow's next move. Poland, bearing the burden of supporting Ukraine, refused to gamble its own cities. Finland, with a border of more than 1,000 kilometers with Russia, knew better than most how quickly threats could escalate. Together, they pushed the EU to act, framing the wall as not just a regional measure, but a continental shield. It was a decision Europe had not made in decades, to build a new kind of frontier defense, not against tanks rolling across fields, but against machines that cross silently in the night sky. The drone wall was no longer an idea, it was a promise. The drone wall is not a single fence or line of concrete. It is a network, a living shield woven from sensors, signals, and machines. Along the forests of Finland, the plains of Poland, and the borders of the Baltics, radar towers are being raised like watchmen, sweeping the skies day and night. Their beams are tuned to spot the smallest, slowest drones, the kind that fly low to avoid traditional air defenses. Where radar cannot see, acoustic and thermal sensors fill the gaps, listening for the faint hum of engines, watching for the heat signatures of incoming swarms. But detection is only the first layer. Once identified, enemy drones will meet an invisible storm, electronic warfare. Powerful jammers will flood the skies with interference, cutting GPS links, blinding onboard cameras, scrambling command signals. A swarm that once flew in formation may suddenly spin out of control, crashing into fields or rivers. Mobile units mounted on trucks will be able to move quickly, blanketing vulnerable areas in protective bubbles. Beyond that comes the wall's sharp edge. Interceptors, lasers, missiles, and drones will strike anything that makes it through. In some areas, directed energy weapons are being tested, beams capable of burning a drone out of the sky in seconds, silently and at low cost. Elsewhere, rapid-fire cannons are positioned to shred waves of intruders. But perhaps the most striking innovation is the hunter drone. Agile, fast, and built to ram or disable its target mid-air. These defenders can patrol autonomously, locking on to threats in real time, engaging swarms with swarms. All of it will be tied together through a command network, an electronic brain designed to track, prioritize, and eliminate threats at machine speed. When a swarm approaches, human commanders may not even have time to decide. The drone wall's AI systems will assign interceptors, launch jammers, and coordinate defenses in seconds. To its architects, this is a revolution, a digital iron curtain stretching thousands of kilometers. Unlike the static fortifications of the past, it is mobile, adaptive, and constantly evolving. To critics, it is an enormous gamble. Technology changes quickly, and adversaries adapt. Russia's drone war has already proven that for every defense built, a new tactic emerges. What works today may be obsolete tomorrow. Still, Europe presses forward. Billions are flowing into the project, contracts expanding, and prototypes already deployed in border zones. The vision is clear. A seamless shield that will not just protect towns and power grids, but send a message to Moscow that the skies of Europe are no longer open. Every night in Ukraine, the Russian playbook unfolds in the skies. Shahed drones, imported from Iran and modified in Russian factories, rise in swarms from launch pads hundreds of kilometers away. They fly low, hugging river valleys and tree lines, slipping past radars. Sirens scream in Kyiv, Odessa, and Kharkiv as the engines buzz overhead. Anti-aircraft guns roar, missiles streak upward, but no matter how many are destroyed, some always break through. Explosions ripple across power stations, fuel depots, apartment blocks. It is not just destruction, it is exhaustion. Each drone costs only tens of thousands of dollars. Each interceptor that stops it may cost millions. This is the nightmare Europe sees on its doorstep. In Vilnius, in Warsaw, in Tallinn, the question is simple. If Russia unleashes the same tactic on NATO soil, what then? 100 drones aimed at Poland's power grid could plunge cities into darkness. Swarms over the Baltics could overwhelm defenses before reinforcements even arrive. Finland, with its vast and exposed border, could face wave after wave designed not to occupy territory, but to paralyze infrastructure and sow chaos. And Russia is not stopping at Shaheds. Its engineers are experimenting with swarms guided by artificial intelligence, able to shift course mid-flight and coordinate like flocks of birds. New variants are being built smaller and faster, harder to detect, harder to hit. Others are designed as decoys, meant to confuse radars and lure interceptors away from the real threat. The strategy is simple: quantity over quality, saturation over precision. Russia has seen how the West scrambles to shoot down every drone, and it intends to exploit that weakness. For Europe, the fear is not abstract. Already, Russian propaganda mocks the EU's plans, claiming that no wall of technology will stop Moscow's unstoppable swarms. Intelligence reports warn that production lines in Russia are scaling up, fed by Iranian designs, North Korean components, and covert shipments that bypass sanctions. If the Kremlin decides to test the drone wall, it will not be with a handful of drones, but with hundreds, perhaps thousands, launched in waves designed to crush defenses under sheer weight. This is why the drone wall matters. It is not just a project, it is a bet that Europe can adapt faster than Moscow. That sensors, jammers, and interceptors can outpace swarms built cheap and fast. That money and technology can hold the line where steel and trenches once did. But the shadow of Russia looms over every kilometer of border, and the question remains: when the first real swarm comes, will the wall hold, or will it crumble like so many defenses before it? In Brussels, the announcement of the drone wall was greeted with applause and unease in equal measure. On paper, it was the most ambitious European defense project in decades, a shield stretching across thousands of kilometers, designed to protect not just frontline states, but the whole continent. But behind the speeches, the political cracks quickly appeared. For the Baltic nations, for Poland, for Finland, the project is an existential necessity. Their leaders speak bluntly. They live under the shadow of Moscow, and they have no illusions about its intentions. They remember the tanks of the Soviet era, and they see the drones that now terrorize Ukraine. To them, the wall cannot come soon enough. Every month of delay is another month of vulnerability. In Berlin and Paris, however, the tone is more cautious. Germany supports the wall, but quietly worries about the cost: billions of euros in an already strained defense budget. France raises concerns about duplication, arguing that NATO's integrated air defense should remain the backbone of Europe's security. Southern European states, far from Russia's border, question why they should pay so heavily for a wall they believe protects others more than themselves. The arguments ripple through the European Parliament. Is this wall a true collective defense, or another line dividing East and West inside the Union? Some fear that building a distinctly European defense shield will strain ties with Washington, undermining NATO by suggesting Europe no longer trusts America's guarantees. Others insist the opposite, that the wall shows Europe is finally taking responsibility for its own survival. Inside NATO headquarters, the debate is equally sharp. American officials welcome any investment in European defense, but some worry the wall will be more symbolic than practical. Can thousands of kilometers really be sealed against swarms? Or will the wall collapse under its first test, leaving NATO to pick up the pieces? For Russia, these debates are gold. Kremlin media mocks the EU as divided, claiming the wall is nothing more than a paper shield that will collapse under the weight of politics before it even faces a drone. Yet the very fact that Europe is considering such a massive project is also a warning to Moscow. The age of complacency is over. In the end, the drone wall is not just about radars and interceptors. It is about politics, about unity, about whether Europe truly believes it is facing war, or still hopes it can buy peace through hesitation. The stakes are not only technological, they are psychological, and the first failure, whether political or military, could prove just as devastating as the drones themselves. Along Europe's eastern edge, the night is no longer silent. Radar towers sweep their invisible beams across forests and fields. Electronic jammers hum with quiet menace, ready to blind anything that crosses the frontier. High above, interceptor drones drift like shadows, waiting for a signal to strike. This is the drone wall, an invisible fortress stretching from the Arctic Circle to the Black Sea, built not of steel or stone, but of signals, circuits, and machines. It is Europe's boldest gamble in a generation. Billions of euros poured into sensors, lasers, interceptors, and AI command networks. A declaration that never again will the continent be caught unprepared, that Moscow's swarms will crash into a shield instead of cities. Yet beneath the confidence lies the fear that history may repeat itself. Walls built with pride have crumbled before, the Maginot Line, the Iron Curtain, symbols of strength that became symbols of failure. Now, as Russia floods Ukraine with cheap drones and hints at swarms even larger, the question presses harder with each passing day. Can this wall truly hold back the storm? Can technology, no matter how advanced, withstand the relentless weight of numbers? The border glows with its new guardians, but the future remains uncertain. Perhaps this wall will stand as Europe's salvation, or perhaps it will shatter in its first true test, leaving the continent exposed once more to the fury from the east. What do you think? Will Europe's drone wall hold the line against Moscow's swarms, or is it destined to crumble when the storm finally comes?